Yes, at the stage. Hello, William. How are you doing?
Hello, Kevork. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm
I'm very
okay.
happy to have you today on Syrian Analysis. I was showing the audience the atrocities of HTS in the past few days in Latakia, Tartus, and Jable. It seems that HTS has accelerated the sectarian violence, basically, and they have sent security forces into some Alawite-dominated neighborhoods, and they have been firing on the residential buildings and calling them pigs. Basically, this has been widely circulated since the beginning of the conflict in Syria, that if you are not following their strict, let's say, ideology, in their eyes, you're a pig, and they can kill you, basically. I don't know if you would like to share your story, William. Would you like to share your story? Like, when did you decide to go, and what differences did you see while you were going to the country, as a start of the conversation? You don't have to mention all the details. We don't. I definitely don't want to harm your opportunities in the future, but we would like to hear your perspective. You've been to Syria multiple times before the fall of the Assad regime, and then after the fall of the Assad regime, you went again. What motivated you to go into a zone where you could be, like, it's very dangerous, I would believe. Like, you already faced similar experience in Sinjar, right, in Iraq, but you were very adamant to go to Syria after the regime change. Could you share your story? How did you go, and what differences did you see?
Yeah, sure. So at the time, I was living in Beirut, and of course, everyone knows that Israel was heavily bombing southern Lebanon and the suburbs of Beirut in the war or in its war against Hezbollah. So I was there in Beirut, and then, of course, it came as a big surprise to most people that the Assad government fell. I think you were, of course, predicting that and warning about that there would be a military campaign by HTS from Idlib maybe a month in advance. And then,
Yes.
sure enough, that's what happened. But it still came as quite a shock how quickly everything happened. And of course, there seemed to be a deal of some kind between Turkey, Russia, the US, Israel, for example, to let that happen. But so when I heard a few days after Assad fell, I just heard that the border was open and journalists were going. So I just went, and
They didn't ask you for a journalistic visa. You just go, right?
at that time it was just a few days after Assad had fallen, so it was a very chaotic situation. The Israelis were still bombing all the military sites in Syria. So at the border, the Lebanese stamped you across, and then on the Syrian side, there were a few like young guys, like FSA, Free Army guys, that were doing just the most basic checks. A lot of these guys looked like they were probably like 16, 17 years old, and
Wow.
that's it. So you just headed across the border in a taxi, and that was it. So as I was coming into Damascus, the Meza military airport was still on fire. The smell was really bad. You could smell it. I mean, similar to what it smelled like in Beirut at times. And then as I drove into Damascus, near to Bab Tuma, where most of the tourists and the journalists stay, the passport office was still on fire there near the Abbasian Square. So anyways, yeah, I just went, but I had been dying to go because I had been, during the Assad government time. And as a foreigner in those days, you could go as a tourist, but it was very controlled. They kept a close eye on the tourists and all the foreigners who came into the country. So you had to just stick to a very, controlled tourist kind of agenda, and you didn't have a lot of freedom to talk to people. So that was the crazy thing, was suddenly I was just in Damascus and I could go anywhere I wanted. And at that time, again, HTS, they don't have a ton of manpower, so there weren't like checkpoints anywhere at that time. Now there are. As a few weeks passed, there were more checkpoints and things, but initially just nothing. So you're just free to get on a bus. or get in a service like a microbus and just go really anywhere. So I was there for a couple months, and I went all over the place, Damascus, of course, and to many of the suburbs. I went to Ghuta, Duma, Yarmouk, Jeramana, then to Aleppo. I went to Idlib a couple times. I went to Tartus. I went to Latakia, Homs. Unfortunately, very briefly in Homs. I wish I could have stayed there longer. But yeah.
Are you going to contribute to the observations that you saw there in your book, or this is going to be separate?
It may have to be separate. There's a few things that I think I need to add. I was going to publish the book, about a few months ago. And then, when I got there, again, just the ability to talk to so many people. There's a few things that I need to change. So the book talks about basically the U.S. and Israeli effort to spark the early protests in 2011, and also to start the Al-Qaeda-led insurgency, which culminated, of course, in HTS taking over the country, in December. Yeah. But yeah, there are some things I need to add. I mean, there's many things you can learn from the outside, but there's many things you can only learn when you're on the inside. And again, with HTS taking over, it's changing the country a lot. There are some good things. If you want, I can talk about it. There's some.
Yeah, of course. We want to know everything.
And one of those good things is that people are more free to talk. There are a lot of people who said we would be having a conversation about politics, and they said, this is the first time I've had a free and open conversation about politics like ever. And
this is mostly, I'm receiving similar things, that people are speaking more political, become more political, let's say, and speaking their mind freely, but under certain limits. And they have the freedom now to criticize Assad, but how far can they go against HTS? That's the question.
Yeah, and to criticize HTS online, I mean, some people do it, but there's a lot of fear of that. But again, they can talk freely about the past years. And I think it will take HTS a while to kind of get their intelligence service organized to really be closely monitoring people in the way that the Assad government did. So I expect the situation to kind of be the same moving forward, but it takes some time to kind of establish an intelligence service that can keep an eye on everything. But another one big thing for a lot of people is, of course, I talked to a lot of young guys, a lot of young Syrians that were so worried about having to go into the army that they just basically tried to stay in university as long as they could, and then they tried to make a plan to leave the country. Because you could leave the country and just try to work, and if you sent enough money back, I think maybe if you were outside the country for 5 years, you could pay maybe $8,000 when you came back, and then you didn't have to worry about being in the military. But that was something that I understand the necessity of it given the situation that the Syrian government was in, but it really just made life. Young guys in Syria just felt like they had no future in the country, and the only thought they had was to leave. So
yes,
I remember talking to one Druze guy from Jeramana, and he talked a lot about the sanctions, like when the Caesar sanctions, the U.S. sanctions, took effect in 2019. It just totally crushed the economy. The currency just collapsed in value. People that had good government jobs were making maybe $25, $30 a month. And so this guy would go to his government job during the day, and then he would drive as a taxi literally every free minute that he had, weekends and nights, just to make enough money to feed the family. But he told me like his only thought was to just find a way to get his sons out of the country. So the fact that when HTS came, that requirement for military service ended, that was like a huge relief for lots and lots of people. There's some negative effects of that because we're kind of seeing what kind of new army the new government is building. But anyways, those are at least maybe two things that were improvements, that people could talk more freely in general, although within limits, as you mentioned, but more freely than before. And then Secondly, the military
The
service.
militarist. I just wanna make a comment on this because this is very important, and this has been like we, let's say, the people who stood, let's say, on the side of the Syrian army against HTS type of groups, we've been pushing for long, lobbying that there has to be a Syrian army that is based on people who want to volunteer, and this has to be more like a professional army. And even in the modern warfare, things have changed completely. Like forcing people to go and fight, it's no longer something that is desirable, even in the Syrian society. And the Syrian government lost a lot of its popular base because many people were forced to send their sons to the military, right? And therefore, as you mentioned, many people started going to university and then doing a master and a second master and then failing in the last year. Why? Because they don't want to go and die in a war against these Takfiri groups. And finally, if they find a job opportunity to Dubai or in some Gulf countries, or even go as a refugee to Europe, they would not hesitate to do that. So there are so many things that I personally speak about the geopolitics of this conflict, but there have been many horrible mistakes from the Syrian government side. One of the things that you already mentioned, right, about the military service. The second is about free speech. Like, I live in Germany. I mean, even free speech here has limitations, but at the end of the day, when people have the right for assembly and protest and demonstration, what changes when people demonstrate or go into protest? Nothing. Technically nothing. So let the people be more engaged in political life, allow them to speak more, and don't force them to go and fight in the military. There are so many people who would like to join the military, if it's a volunteer, if it has a good salary, and then you have the services that you receive from the, let's say, the medical care and free fuel, etc., etc. And many people would join. If you are if you're a person who wants to fight, you can go and join the army. So I totally agree with you that even the corruption, like the thing with the corruption in Syria was so visible, it's like a stick in your eye. Wherever you go, you can see corruption in the public sector more than in other sectors. And people were fed up of this. Therefore, when it comes to a situation where people were already pushed below the poverty line, I'm talking about ordinary people now, and then you have all this corruption, and then your son will go and fight in the military. There were so many people fought for 10 years, and then what? After 10 years, when you leave the military, you're 30 years old. You have to start your life now. Now, at 30 years old, there are people who are ahead of you for 10 years. So yes, the government made huge and horrible mistakes. I totally agree with you. And removing the military service is definitely compulsory, let's say, military service, definitely a positive thing. But this is, like you said, about the people are more able to speak. But there is still some serious violence happening in the country, but this is not politically, let's say, motivated, but rather religious or sectarian motivated. Are you following this case recently? What's happening, for example, in Latakia?
The past few days, not necessarily, but there have been a lot of killings of. I mean, in general, yes, there have been a lot of killings of Alawites in the Homs and Hama countrysides. And that's that's a huge problem. So the thing is, when you're in Damascus, there's life is just kind of going on, and you see HTS guys around, and there's no problem. And I met quite a few HTS guys, and I never had any problems from them, and they were always actually very nice to me and very friendly, and all the interactions that I had with them were great. On the other hand, if you're an Alawite living in one of these villages like Fahal or Arza was another one outside of Hama, there's been these massacres that have been going on where HTS guys will come into an Alawite village, kind of do a security check for weapons, and they'll often be very polite and good with the people. But maybe a few hours later, another group of guys will come. No one knows exactly who they are, but they come right in the heels of the more formal HTS units, and they'll massacre people. So Again, the situation is very different from place to place in the country, but this is a huge problem. These massacres of Alawites in the coastal regions, and a lot of Syrians are talking about it in Homs as well. A lot of people being killed in Homs for apparently sectarian reasons, and also just kidnappings in general are really on the rise. There's a lot of young women, like university age, who are being kidnapped and just disappearing.
Yes. In Aleppo too, I'm receiving reports of especially female students are missing.
Yeah. So, again, these are things that are really worrisome, that are not necessarily, who knows what kind of effect they'll have on the broader geopolitical scale. But, before the Assad government fell, it was safe to go out at night. Places like Aleppo and Damascus were very lively, like late at night until 1, 2 in the morning. But these days, people don't go out much at night, especially women. Like, they'll pretty much not go out past 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. Even a lot of these women who are these young women who are disappearing, they're getting kidnapped in broad daylight, actually.
Yes.
But like Aleppo, for example, is like almost totally dead at night, and there's not much electricity, of course, so the whole city is just really dark, and it's not very inviting to be walking around. But anyways, now people are just worried about crime and safety and things like kidnappings and murders. So that's a difference. There is a less of a feeling of security in general.
Let's speak a little bit about the Israeli. They are seeing what's happening in Syria, from chaos into some of the sectarian motivated killings, and how they're using this sectarian violence to present themselves as the savior of minorities. And I'm finding a hard time nowadays to explain my position about this, because on one hand, I see the persecution, like against some of the Druze or in the Alawites. So, but at the same time, I know that Israel helped to create these conditions in the country, and now Israel is using these conditions to present itself as a savior. From the Israeli point of view, what is the end goal of Israel in Syria? And is there any difference between the end goal of Turkey and the end goal of Israel in this case?
Well, I think the end goal of Israel is clear. With Turkey, it's a little bit less clear to me. But to start with Israel, their basic strategy has been clear for decades, and the same policy has applied both to Iraq and to Syria, and that is to turn both countries into weak, ethnically divided countries with no powerful army. And so they use various cards to do that. One is like the Kurdish card, trying to promote like Kurdish autonomy and independence. The other card is the ISIS and Al-Qaeda or Nusra card, where they promote Salafist militias who are sectarian, that attack other minorities. So that led to the division of Iraq in 2014 when ISIS took over Mosul, for example. They did that in cooperation with the US military, from whom they were getting their weapons, and also in cooperation with Masoud Barzani and the KDP.
Yes.
That's what led to the fall of Mosul. There was an agreement between ISIS, the US, and Barzani to allow ISIS to take the country, to take Mosul. And that also led to the Yazidi genocide, because about 2 months later, Masoud Barzani and ISIS cooperated to massacre Yazidis and take their women as sex slaves and ethnically cleanse hundreds of thousands of them, because Barzani and the people supporting him wanted Sinjar to be part of an independent Kurdish state, so they could send, also as part of that, they were going to be sending oil from Kirkuk to Turkey and then to Israel. Anyway, so that's always the strategy, is to promote sectarianism, to divide these countries, destroy any powerful army of any Arab state. And I think that's clear, what's happening in Syria now. So again, the Israelis have been using the Kurdish card for a long time. And as your listeners, I'm sure, know, the Kurds are occupying northeast Syria with the help of the US and controlling the oil there. But what's interesting is that the Israelis are getting very, very aggressive with the Druze card now.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Druze are in a tough position because, again, they have there's agreements between them and the HTS government, like in Jeramana, for example. The Druze leadership in Jeramana, they negotiate and have relations with HTS. And when the Assad government fell, there was no problems in Jeramana. There was like an agreement that HTS would not come into the city. For people that don't know, Jeramana is like a suburb of Damascus, but it's massive, like not so much in size, but there's like 3 million people there. Something like half of the population of Damascus lives in Jeramana.
Wow.
And it's historically Druze, but there are many Christians there, and then also many Sunni Muslims live there that were displaced due to the fighting in the suburbs in Ghouta, Jobar, and places like that. Many of them came to live in Jeramana, and everyone gets along just fine and lives very well together. So you just see everything in Jeramana, from women wearing the niqab to women wearing European Western style dress with no hijab, and everyone gets along fine. But for the Druze, it's tough because HTS has done things in the past. There were a number of massacres that HTS did against the Druze during the war, and they do view Druze as unbelievers. So now it's kind of easy for the Israelis to come in and say, look, you can't trust these guys from HTS. They're terrorists, and we will protect you. And look how the Druze live in Israel. They live just fine. They're living in peace. So why don't you separate from Syria and join us, And if the chaos gets bad enough, then that's going to be very appealing for Druze. I've talked to quite a few who said, yeah, we have relatives in Israel. Why can't we go visit them? We don't have any problem with Israel. On the other hand, there are other Druze who say no. They're very strongly against Israel and very patriotic and devoted to staying within the Syrian state. So I'm not saying what the Druze should or should not do, or that they all have this or that opinion, but I'm just saying that if the Israelis are able to create sectarian chaos, which they're very capable of doing, then that will just make it more appealing for the Druze to say, look, like Syria is this huge mess, and this government, HTS government, is against us. They're Salafis that hate us. So why not go with Israel? I mean, that's going to always be a temptation.
But what can Israel do in this case? Like militarily, they have declared that the southern part of Syria, south of Damascus, is a demilitarized zone. And they are destroying the depots and any military presence there. So basically, Israel has a military dominance over southern Syria. They're creating what is called a buffer zone. And if one day they try to move from Daraa to Sweda, and even if 10% of the population in Sweda receives them, it will be de facto annexation of a region which Israel wants to create this Balkanization in the country. And when I see the administration in the United States and all the, let's say, the very ultra Zionist member of administration in Trump's team, then I would suspect that if there is a clash of interest between Turkey and Israel in Syria, then Trump will side with Israel to achieve this goal, and that is to open a corridor between Sweda and what they call this is a David's corridor to the eastern shore of the Euphrates, all the way to the Kurds. How realistic is this David corridor? The Americans are on the Tanaf border crossing, right?
Yeah, so I think it's very realistic. I mean, as you mentioned, the Israelis have already occupied large amounts of additional Syrian land. I mean, as soon as the Assad government fell, in addition to destroying
I think we lost William's volume. I will just try to Do you guys can still hear William? Because I don't, and I will try to, just a second, see if I can take him back. Yeah, William, you're back.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, you said it's realistic. It's possible. You said, and then afterwards we couldn't hear you.
Okay, yeah,
About the David corridor.
It's possible. I mean, as soon as the Assad government fell, of course, the Israelis, in addition to just doing this massive bombing campaign to target all Syrian military infrastructure, they've occupied a lot of new land in Quneitra, in the Yarmouk Basin, where there's a lot of water. And, you know, they've been confiscating weapons from these Syrian army depots where there are a lot of like anti-tank missiles and things like that. And it's just a reminder that literally there is absolutely nothing that anyone could do if the Israelis decided to just fully invade all the way up to Damascus and annex Jeramana, and then create that entire corridor, as you mentioned, through Sueda. The US and Israel already control the 10th crossing, and they could, you know, they can easily make a corridor all the way up to northeast Syria, where and join up with Kurdish and American forces that are already occupying that area. In fact, there was just a report yesterday saying that ISIS had disbanded all of its activities in the Badia Desert, which is in that same corridor, and all of the ISIS members that had been based in that desert that the US never did anything to fight against, even though the US said they were occupying Syria for that exact purpose. All of those ISIS units have disbanded, and their members have gone back to the cities, like to Aleppo, to Homs, Deir ez-Zor, and places where they are from originally. So, you know, maybe the ISIS operation can be wrapped up now if the Israelis are going to go in and just directly, and the Americans are just going to control everything directly. So it's really ominous. But as far as Turkey, you know, it's not clear to me. I mean, I've always viewed Erdogan as someone who collaborates very closely with Netanyahu and the Israelis. Of course, he talks very strongly against the genocide in Gaza, and talks very strongly in support of Palestine, because Turks feel that way themselves. But Erdogan has always cooperated with the Israelis under the table. And again, the operation in Mosul in 2014 is a big example of that, where Erdogan and Netanyahu were working together to support ISIS in Mosul and in Sinjar, so that the Kurds could restart those oil exports from Kirkuk and send them through the pipeline to the Seyhan port and then to Israel. You know, by 2015, the Israelis were getting like 77% of their oil from from Iraqi Kurdistan. The Financial Times had a report about that. And of course, during this genocide, everyone knows that the Israelis are getting most of their oil now from Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan sends the oil through those same pipelines to Seyhan, and then they put it on the ships and send it to Israel. So people are talking about, you know, Turkey versus Israel, but I don't really think so. I think Turkey, the US, Israel, they're all probably on the same page. And of course, they have to act like they're opposed to each other. But at the end of the day, I think, I guess on the Kurdish issue, you know, there's more disagreement there. But anyways, I just see Erdogan as more of an ally or an asset of Israel. And I don't know if you share that opinion or differ with me on that. But
actually, I yesterday published an article in Substack about this exact case. And probably some of the end games between Erdogan and Netanyahu are different. However, they shared the goal of the regime change for different reasons. For Erdogan, it was the opportunity to extend his neo-Ottoman rule basically over Syria. And HTS is an intelligence construct of the Turkish intelligence and also the Americans in this case. This was a great opportunity for them to extend their influence till Damascus. However, now, and on the other hand, Israel's goal was to break the axis of resistance by removing the Assad, let's say, from the chessboard, and this was very successful. And they have weakened the axis of resistance in this way. But then what comes after the regime change? That's the serious question. I don't think that Israel will accept a Turkish autonomy, let's say, of any sort over Damascus, this is going to be a matter of conflict between Israel and Turkey sooner or later, and the United States will side with Israel on this case. So Erdogan could be satisfied with Aleppo, Homs, and Idlib, basically, and Damascus probably could be more neutral, or an American figure comes. And when I say an American figure, I mean Saudi endorsed personality in this case. And who comes in my mind comes the former commander in the Syrian army who was a friend of Bashar al-Assad and the son of the former defense minister of Syria from the family of Atlas, Manaf Atlas. And Manaf Atlas has been prepared and groomed by Saudi Arabia for over a decade now. And he escaped the country through a joint intelligence operation of Saudi Arabia and France to take him out of the country. And now they're receiving Jolani and rolling him a red carpet and everything. This is what Saudi Arabia also did with Assad, rolling him the red carpet and then taking the carpet, pulling the carpet from under his feet, you know. I think they have decided in Saudi Arabia and the UAE to get along with Jolani instead of going into confrontation. But at the same time, they have sent many intelligence assets to Syria in order to see the holes in the system, basically. And sooner or later, we will see that when, if or when a disagreement rises between Turkey and Israel over Damascus, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, all these countries are going to side with Trump and Israel against Turkey. And in this case, I don't see that Erdogan has much of a chance to keep Damascus under the rule of Jolani. And that's why many of the people who nowadays, I don't know if they work for Jolani or they're just voluntarily doing lots of media and PR and propaganda for Jolani on social media platforms, they're already talking about moving the capital to Aleppo. So this is how I start like connecting the dots, like people who are taking selfies with Jolani basically, and they're around him, and they have participated in many of these conferences that happened in the country, and they are proposing like we need to change the capital of Syria from Damascus to Aleppo, or some say we have to change it to Homs because this was the what they say were the capital of the revolution. There are different names of the cities.
Yeah.
So this could be one of the paving the way for the people to swallow sooner or later losing Damascus. And I'm very pessimistic on this case. I mean, I'm Syrian. I'm not analyzing here now. I'm just sharing my thoughts and feelings. As you mentioned, if Israel wants to roll into Damascus, they can roll into Damascus in 48 hours, even less. So what stops Israel basically from occupying Damascus, in your opinion? Like, there is no military obstacle, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know if they need to, and it maybe just causes more problems for them to try to occupy Damascus directly. Instead, it'd be better to have a proxy there, an Arab proxy doing it for them.
I agree.
And I think that's interesting. I hadn't heard that people talking about moving the capital to Aleppo, because I think the Zionist project and also the Turkish Neo-Ottoman project, I mean, they basically dovetail. And if Erdogan, again, has been talking about this for a long time, and again, that's also part of what motivated his role in what happened in Mosul in 2014, because the Turks that think like Erdogan, they think that Mosul belongs to them. They think that Aleppo belongs to them. And so if the Turks can take the north, Idlib, Aleppo, even maybe down to Homs, as you mentioned, and then the Israelis either directly or by proxy control Damascus and everything south, then I think that's an outcome that's really positive from the perspective of both the Turks and the Israelis. So I just don't see why there would be that much conflict. I don't see that the Turks would really insist on trying to control all the way south to like Deraa. They don't have influence there now. But what to do with Damascus, I guess, is an issue, but I just see the projects as mostly dovetailing. With Northeast Syria, it's a little bit more tricky. I mean, outwardly, the Turks and the PKK, or by extension, the Syrian Democratic Forces or the SDF, are enemies. But there's weird things that go on, like, you know, the United States will create or Israel will create a terrorist organization like they did in Al Qaeda in Iraq in 2003 as like an excuse to intervene, you know. And I think the Turks sometimes do that too, because the PKK, for example, I've heard a lot of reports from Yazidis that say that a lot of the PKK receive their salaries actually from Masoud Barzani and the KDP. And Masoud Barzani and the KDP are basically allies or proxies of Turkey.
Yeah.
And they work closely with the Israelis. They work closely with the US. So sometimes I wonder if the PKK is actually a little bit like that too. Like they're, you know, even the Turks don't mind that they're there, or might even like covertly fund them via Masoud Barzani. And that gives them a reason to intervene and create a buffer zone in northern Syria. I mean, the Turks have bases in northern Iraq now. And, you know, now with the news of Abdullah Öcalan saying that the PKK should disband, I mean, he's been in a Turkish prison for decades.
Yeah.
And it's a little hard for me to imagine that he is actually like an independent actor at this point. I mean, how could Abdullah Öcalan not be controlled by the Turks after 20 years or whatever in a prison? And so sometimes I think this announcement to wrap up the PKK is probably something Turkey's doing. So anyways, I just see like all these projects kind of go together. And again, the end goal is just to keep Syria and Iraq weak and divided and without any serious strong Arab army. I mean, that's always been Israel's dream. And the Israelis talk about the Greater Israel Project. You know, there's that French documentary that came out last year where Bezalel Smotrich, the Zionist minister, was talking about going all the way to Damascus and to the Euphrates in Iraq. And sometimes you hear him say that and it sounds so fantastic. But, you know, obviously with what's happened in the last year, with what happened on 7th of October, it's opened the door to all these things for the Israelis, and things are happening very fast, obviously.
Yeah. William, I want to ask you a question, which is many of the people who consider themselves on the opposite side of Israel nowadays are in disagreement. We have talked about this when we met last time, and I would like to revive this conversation in a different way. How do you see the axis, what they called themselves, the axis of resistance, after 14 to 16 months of 1.5 year, basically, around, of October 7? Is the axis of resistance stronger after October 7 or less strong after October 7, taking into account what happened in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, and Iran's step back from the direct confrontation with the United States and Israel? I'm watching lots of content recently, and I see some of the journalists and experts saying that the resistance is not only as strong as it was before October 7, but they are even stronger now. And some people, like I'm going to say, I myself, this was a wake-up call for me after October 7, and I was definitely on the side of the Palestinian people, on the side of the Lebanese people and the Syrian people, but I see that what happened in these countries is a defeat, and worse than what happened after the Six-Day War in 1967. Maybe I'm just being thinking more emotionally because my country is gone, and I don't think that there is going to be any centralized government in Syria for the next decades, and this is going to create more chaos and vertical divisions in the country, and people will struggle a lot until some military figure comes and establish a dictatorship again to bring everything together, and the history is just repeating itself. Am I being pessimistic, or is it realistic to say that the camp which used to wage an armed struggle against Israel is weakened now after October 7?
Oh yeah, I agree with with you. I'm that the resistance to Israel is much weaker, sadly, and because before October 7th, there was a lot of talk about the unity of fronts, and the idea was that, well, if there's an alliance between Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, and to some extent Hamas, that all those groups could be fighting Israel on, like, Israel would have to defend itself on like 4 fronts all at once, and that would be very hard for them to do. And there was a lot of confidence in the abilities of Hezbollah within their missiles and rockets, that they could really devastate Tel Aviv if Israel ever tried to start a war against them. It almost like there was kind of this feeling that Hezbollah had a really strong deterrent with its missiles that, of course, were helped produced in Syria with the help of Iran to a large extent. But ever since 7th of October, the Israelis have basically just gone step by step and opened up each one of these fronts one by one.
Yes.
And there was never a coordinated, united response by the axis of resistance to attack Israel from all fronts at once, which was what their advantage theoretically would have come from. And there were just problems about the idea of an axis of resistance from the beginning, because Hamas didn't even notify Hezbollah or Iran that they were going to launch 7th of October. I've got some ideas about 7th of October that are a little maybe more on the conspiratorial side. I mean, I definitely feel like, I guess it's obvious that the Israelis were aware that Hamas was planning an operation.
I'm on your side on this. We're on the same page.
And the Israelis let it happen. And then, of course, we know that most of the Israelis killed that day were killed by Israeli helicopters and tanks, and the people at the Nova Music Festival were burned alive by Israeli helicopter fire. Hamas killed some people that day, of course, but I think it was quite a small number. And this was something the Israelis were wanting to happen and were probably planning for a long time, because it opened the door to everything that they've done since. And by blaming all those deaths on October 7th on Hamas, all 1,200 or so, and then claiming, of course, all the fake things like the mass rape that Hamas supposedly did, and claiming the 40 beheaded babies and all these things, it just opened the door for the Israelis to do all these things that they wanted, which is, again, reclaim, smash Gaza, totally destroy it, and try to reestablish Jewish settlements there. Totally destroy Hezbollah, and then destroy Syria. And they didn't destroy Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is definitely weakened. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Lebanon, and maybe you hear people online saying that the axis of resistance is stronger now, but I never hear that from people in Lebanon who are knowledgeable about those things. That's not their attitude. Everyone understands that the Israelis dealt Hezbollah a really heavy blow. I mean, even the killing of Hassan Nasrallah is obviously evidence of that. And psychologically, that was really hard on a lot of people to see him get killed. And I also question, the role of Iran. I mean, I guess they were talking so big. I remember even the foreign minister, Amir Abdullahian, saying things like shortly after 7th of October that if the Israelis invaded Gaza, like did a ground operation in Gaza, that was like a red line, and that the Iranians were going to take this huge actions. And so, and then their action never kind of matched the rhetoric. And then there's obviously big questions about what happened when President Raisi was killed.
Yes.
And that seems to have been a coup. And within Iran, there are pro-Western and pro-Zionist elements. Zarif, who just stepped down, Pezeshkian. It seems like there was a coup, and these are really people who are devoted to reconciling with the West and just making money. And how were there so many assassinations? How were so many Hezbollah members assassinated? How were so many Ismail Haniyeh assassinated in Tehran? Like, the Israelis have just infiltrated some of these groups. And so that, and all the destruction that was wrought in South Lebanon, I mean, they just like terrible destruction in Nabatea, terrible destruction in Tyre, in Baalbek.
And now they have a pro-US government in Lebanon doesn't allow them to reconstruct this region. So they even installed a pro-Saudi, pro-American government in Lebanon and also in Syria.
Yeah, so I mean, it's sad to say, but I don't understand how people could say anything or think that anything besides that the Israelis have just won these massive victories. And it's painful to say, but I don't know who could think otherwise.
Is it possible for Hezbollah to rearm and reorganize itself without Syria?
I mean, I'm not any kind of military expert, so it would be hard to say, but all I can say is that the way they armed themselves before was through Syria and through Iran. And if there's been a coup in Iran, essentially, and the Syrian government is gone, and these missile factories in Masyaf in Homs are gone, and there's a pro-American government in Lebanon. I mean, that even the Iranians can barely send money by like cash by plane to Lebanon just to help Lebanese reconstruct their homes. There were these protests in Lebanon, blocking the airport road because the Iranian planes even bringing cash to help Lebanese rebuild their homes they couldn't get through. So how anyone could get weapons into Lebanon. I mean, I know you can manufacture some things domestically, locally, but I also don't see that. I think that would be very hard.
I'm on your side. We're on the same page on this. I think the people on the popular level, they know it. They're speaking about it. I speak with our Lebanese friends. Some of them, we share the friendship, and they're very honest about this. And I think this has to be the case because after 2006, when Israel was defeated in Lebanon, they have prepared an investigation called the Vinograd report, and they have basically analyzed what they failed and what they managed to succeed in Lebanon in order to fix the mistakes. So on an official level, they accepted, it's not like they said we are defeated, but they have accepted the shortcomings of these wars and what mistakes they have done. But there is this trend nowadays of talking loud about victories. Like I'm checking the map of control over the region, and it doesn't look like to me it's victories after victories like many people claim. So it is important to address the defeat or the blows that these players, state and non-state actors, received for them to be fixed. Otherwise, if everything went well and you're victorious, I think this is a false pretension that the side has been victorious over Israel, which is not the case. I want to be very honest with the people brutally, although this probably hurt some people's feelings because they lost people in this war. People were affected by this war and their homes were gone and destroyed. But I don't want to also sell them false hopes. And when people ask me what could happen in Syria, I think that things are going to go more into to hit the bottom rock, and probably after that there would be a figure who would unite the country. But before that, there is going to be lots of ups and downs and upheavals. The only thing that I don't wish is the partition of Syria, into smaller mini states, and then it will be very difficult for people to coexist again afterwards. That's the thing that I'm really hopeful. William, thank you so much for coming. If you have to say something, please go. We still have some time, and afterwards I can finish it.
Yeah. So again, I just hope that things will get better for Syrians because, for some people, when Assad left and Julani came, life just went on. It continued. I went to Jabla, a mixed Sunni and Alawite city, and on the coast, and I have some Alawite friends there, and they just said, yeah, life kind of continues. And the HTS guys that happen to be there were treating people, at least inside the city. Again, the countryside and these things we talked about earlier is a different story, but the local emir of the local HTS emir, he was from Jabla and played a lot of football at the local club. So he pretty much knew all the young Sunni guys, but he also knew all the young Alawite guys, and they all got along fine. And that sounds kind of crazy, you know, but even my Alawite friends in Jabla were like, had no problem with HTS being there. And at the end of the day, Syrians just want to go about their lives and live, whether it's Assad in power or HTS in power. So when Assad first fell, I thought, well, you know, who knows? You know, Syria was under so much pressure internationally with the sanctions that, you know, who knows? Maybe even with HTS coming to power, somehow things could get better. I mean, Iraqis felt the same way when the US invaded. They were like, well, life was so tough under Saddam, large part because of the sanctions, that who knows, the Americans are here and maybe things will get better. And of course, that was not the case, because the US didn't, and specifically the Jewish neocons that launched the war in 2003, did not want Iraq to get better. The occupation was just the beginning. Again, they started these al-Qaeda groups because they wanted to tear the country apart and create sectarianism and create a sectarian civil war. So my question is now is like, even if Jolani, if he was able to just simply try to govern the country and make it better, who knows? It could be a better future for Syria. But sadly, just like Iraq in 2003, the people that put Jolani in power and the people that, you know, the Israelis, the Americans, the Turks, etc., I don't think they want a good future for Syria, and they want to continue to divide it. They want to make things worse. They want the sectarianism to get worse. And so I just worry that it's going to, the situation in the coming years will just, again, be even worse like it was in Iraq. So that's kind of my fear. But
William, where are you publishing recently? I have already put your X account in the description below. On which platform are you more regularly active?
I haven't been publishing a lot lately, but the Libertarian Institute, and then also at the Cradle, and then again, my book should be coming out, you know, pretty soon. And I had it finished, but once I got to Syria, you know, just learning some new things. There's some things I need that I realized I was, you know, had to adjust or make some changes on. And maybe a final thing, if there's still maybe just 2 minutes. I remember I was in Idlib and was just looking. I went into a shop to buy a sweatshirt, and I was talking to this guy, and it turns out he was from Homs, and he had been had a little shop in Homs, like right near or I guess it was the new clock tower where a lot of the protests were. And he said that at the time Assad was beloved. He said people loved Assad. But then when the killings started in the early protests, and again, I feel like a lot of these killings were not by the Assad security forces, but when those killings started, people attributed those to Assad security forces, and that started this spiral of all the events that have happened. And this same guy, he later joined the Free Army, and he fought with the Free Army faction for about 2 years, and later, you know, just went to Idlib and opened a shop. But I thought that was so interesting that a guy that he said to me that Assad was beloved. And by the US and Israel starting that war in 2011, it set off this chain of events, and it actually changed the Assad government itself very much. Like over the course of the war, you know, there's the corruption, there's the war profiteering, and bad things just happen in war, and both sides, the hatred just expands, and there were a lot of, it made the Assad government much worse. And a big issue in Syria right now is the prisons, and there was a lot of propaganda about Sednaya prison, for example, that was just totally fake, and a lot of rumors that came out of it. But the issue of the prisons is a big one. I talked to many Syrians, and I always made a point to ask, hey, did you ever have like a friend or a relative that disappeared? And so many people said yes. And there's pictures all over different parts of Damascus of people whose relative is missing and they don't know where they are. And so the issue of the prisons is a big one. And there was many people that disappeared from the Nusra and ISIS side and the Free Army side. So I don't know. I just thought maybe just to mention that the issue of people disappearing, it was really terrible. And it happened, both on the government side and on the opposition side. And that was just really disturbing to me over the course of the time that I was there. So anyways, again, just praying that, whoever ends up ruling Syria, that, things will be okay. Syrians are such amazing and nice people. Oh, sorry.
Gesundheit.
We hope that the future will be better for them.
I really hope that is the case. It's really kind of you, of course, to come to the show and share your thoughts and also feelings about the Syrian people. We are here encouraging this type of dialogue. And as you mentioned from the beginning, there were some positive things that the people felt by the removal of Assad, but then there is also negative things. Myself, for those who follow me, I focus on the geopolitics, and I see it's a complete disaster for Syria and for the region, for people who would like to see an independent region from the hegemon, basically, from the empire. And I think that the region has been pushed probably 50 years back in terms of the liberation movements, and that's why I also attributed it to October 7 and what followed and everything. Maybe now is the time for people to focus on themselves, and later they will see if they can free themselves from the empire, or if they want to free themselves from the empire. But until then, I would like to thank you, William, for all you do. And also, we are waiting for your book to be published. I have a copy, guys. I'm a lucky person to have the copy. But when the copy is out, we will have William definitely for different episodes to discuss every single chapter. And then we also give you the link. If you like to purchase his book, that would be amazing. But we will have like a long conversations with him about the book and the dirty war against Syria, and how the US planners basically planned the war, executed the war, and different major events that happened in Syria, which changed the course of the conflict several times during the conflict. We're going to discuss every single one of them. Let's see if William is going to also add some at the end, the fall of the Assad government. That would be like, as we say, the cherry on top of the cake, because speaking about an event that isn't over is different than when you speak about it as there is a chapter, a closing chapter, and the closing chapter is here. And now probably other books should be prepared about the era of Jolani and what comes next. And we can discuss that again. William, thank you so much again, my friend, for coming to the show.
Okay, thanks again, Kevork. Great to talk to you again, man.
Great to talk to you too. And thank you so much, guys, for tuning in to today's live streaming. If you like this content, please hit the like button, subscribe to this YouTube channel. And if you like to do more, you can become a patron, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis, or there are other different means in the description below. And I will see you tomorrow on Friday with Brian Berletic. And just for you to know, guys, it's going to be recorded because he lives in Malaysia, but I'm going to stream it as live at the same time, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. So peace be upon you and upon your families, and peace be upon you, William. Salam.